In a world where love and luxury often collide, we follow Zoe Novak, a young woman at a crossroads. Tired of struggling and yearning for security, she makes a decision that would shock most. She marries Anthony Gupta, a billionaire old enough to be her grandfather. On the surface, it's a transaction, comfort and wealth for companionship. But as Zoe steps into Anthony's world of opulence, she begins to notice cracks in the perfect facade. Strange behaviors, locked doors, and whispered secrets among the staff hint that there's far more to Anthony than his fortune. When she discovers shocking similarities between herself and a woman from Anthony's past, a woman who disappeared under mysterious circumstances, Zoe's quest for truth becomes an obsession. Was her mother's sacrifice worth it? Is Anthony's love genuine? And what does it mean for Zoe's own identity? Buckle up, because this isn't just a story about a marriage of convenience. It's a journey into the dark corners of legacy, love, and the lies that bind us. Zoe Novak had always been the kind of woman who dreamed big but landed small. At 26, she was drowning in student loans, working 3 part-time jobs, and surviving on instant noodles while her peers shared stories of vacations and designer handbags. One day, in a dusty cafe, she overheard a conversation about Anthony Gupta, the reclusive 68-year-old billionaire who'd just lost his wife. Rumor had it he was shopping for a younger bride, not out of love, but for companionship. The idea hit her like a punch. What if I could trade my loneliness for comfort? She scoffed at first, calling herself crazy for even entertaining the thought. But nights of counting pennies and avoiding eviction notices wore her down. When she finally slid into Anthony's office, a sleek, marble-laden space that smelled of cedar and money, she met his gaze and lied through gritted teeth. "I'm not here for your money. I just want stability." But deep down she knew from sugar baby to something else was exactly what she was signing up for. Anthony, with his silver hair and eyes that held secrets like locked safes, offered her a deal, a prenup guaranteeing her $5 million upon his death, a penthouse in Manhattan, and a monthly allowance. "No love required," he said, his voice a velvet monotone. Zoe bit her lip, thinking of her mother's words. Love's a luxury for people who aren't starving. She'd always sworn she'd never become that woman, the stereotype everyone whispered about at coffee shops. But as she signed the papers that night, the pen trembling slightly, she told herself this was temporary. A golden cage with dark walls, she mused bitterly, but at least the rent would be paid. Little did she know, the cage had teeth. The staff at Anthony's estate in the Hamptons greeted her with forced smiles and sideways glances. "Mrs. Gupta, your champagne," the butler said, his tone polite, but his eyes calculating. Zoe learned quickly to navigate the mansion's labyrinthine halls, where gilded mirrors reflected her uneasy smile and the weight of judgment in the air. "They'll call you a gold digger," Anthony warned over a glass of scotch one evening. "But you won't care, will you? Because you're not here for love." Zoe forced a laugh, the sound brittle. Exactly. Yet every night, as she lay in a bed, softer than anything she'd ever known, she'd trace the diamond ring on her finger and wonder, was this worth it? The answer always came back hollow. Love, lies, and luxury. She had the latter too, but the first. It felt buried under the weight of her choices. One morning, Zoe found a sealed envelope in the mailbox, addressed to Mrs. A. Gupta. Inside was a magazine clipping, a photo of her and Anthony at a charity gala, captioned, "The Billionaire's Secret Bride." Comments below ranged from praise, "Good for her, take his money," to venom, "Gold digger scum." She crumpled the paper, muttering, "Who cares what they think?" But the words echoed in her mind like a guilty verdict. At a dinner party that week, a socialite hissed, "I'd never stoop so low," while Zoe choked on her caviar, her cheeks burning. That night, she stared at the ceiling, her heart heavy. What the will didn't say about marriage was that it could, feel like drowning in whispers, yet she refused to flinch. They don't know my story, she told herself. But even she was starting to doubt if she knew it anymore. Zoe's routine became a delicate dance of pretense, attending galas in floor-length gowns, listening to Anthony's polite but distant conversations, and avoiding the mansion's third floor, a place he'd forbidden her to enter. Privacy, he'd explained vaguely. One rainy afternoon, while he napped, she lingered outside the locked door, her fingers hovering over the knob. Why does this room matter so much? The staff's nervous glances when it was mentioned gnawed at her. A maid once dropped a tray of teacups when Zoe asked about it, whispering, "Mrs. Gupta, you shouldn't inquire." Zoe's curiosity sharpened into an ache. A bride's regret, she told herself sternly, wasn't an option. But the door remained a riddle, taunting her with unanswered questions. Weeks later, Zoe found Anthony slumped in his study, clutching a framed photo of a woman who looked strikingly like her. "Who is she?" Zoe blurted, her voice cracking. Anthony froze, then slowly placed the photo face down. "Someone from my past," he said, his tone final. But the resemblance lingered in Zoe's mind like a splinter. That night, she researched his ex-wives online, only to find articles about his late spouse, Eleanor, who died in a car accident decades ago. The woman in the photo wasn't Eleanor. It was someone else, someone with Zoe's green eyes and dimpled smile. The coincidence felt too perfect. The secret she wasn't ready for was clawing its way to the surface, and Zoe didn't know if she dared face it. As months passed, Zoe's initial relief at her decision curdled into unease. Anthony's nightmares grew more frequent. Whimpers in the night, murmurs of a name she didn't recognize. "Lena," he'd whisper, drenched in sweat. Zoe would pat his back mechanically, wondering who this ghost was. The staff's stories grew murkier. The gardener mentioned a hidden child. The chef hinted at a forgotten love. Each fragment fit into a puzzle Zoe was too afraid to complete. But one evening, after finding a torn letter in the trash, a single sentence, "Forgive me for what I've taken," she realized denial was a cage too. She thought he'd die soon. Then everything changed. Only now, she wasn't sure she wanted him to. The truth was a monster under the bed, and she'd just turned on the light. Anthony Gupta's study was a relic of another era, mahogany shelves groaning under leather-bound books, portraits of ancestors with stern gazes, and a fireplace that roared like a lion even in summer. It was here that he first laid out his offer to Zoe, his voice calm as a still lake. "You'll have everything," he said, gesturing to the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed Manhattan's glittering skyline. A life most people dream of. Zoe, in her thrift store dress that clashed horribly with the opulence around her, had laughed nervously. "And what do you get?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Anthony's smile was wry. "Companionship, someone to soften the edges of my old age." But his eyes told a different story, a story of the billionaire's secret that made his fingers drum the desk in agitation whenever he thought no one was looking. He'd been honest in his way, about the money, the houses, the freedom to do as she pleased as long as she played the part of the dutiful wife. What he didn't say was how his late wife's perfume still clung to the sheets, or how the staff flinched when he raised his voice. Zoe noticed these things, cataloging them like entries in a diary. One night, as they dined alone under chandeliers that dripped like frozen waterfalls, she asked, "Why me?" Anthony's fork paused mid-air. "You're unassuming," he said finally. "Not like the others. No agendas." Zoe almost snorted. If only he knew. "Agendas are survival," she murmured, thinking of her mountain of debt. Anthony's gaze sharpened. "Careful, Zoe. Married for money isn't a title I'd want following you in the tabloids." The warning was gentle, but the steel beneath it made her spine stiffen. Anthony's kindness, when it surfaced, was disarming. He'd leave post-it notes on her bathroom mirror. Shower gel reordered, AG. Or remember she liked her coffee black, even though she'd mentioned it only once. Yet these moments felt performative, like scenes from a play he'd rehearsed 1,000 times. Zoe often wondered what the hidden life of a tycoon looked like beyond the suits and the cigars. One afternoon, she found him in the garden, feeding pigeons with trembling hands. "They don't judge," he said quietly. Zoe sat beside him, the silence stretching until it ached. "Do you think I'm a terrible person?" he asked suddenly. She glanced at him, surprised. "For what?" "For settling." The word hung between them, heavy as a stone. Zoe thought of her own compromises and said nothing. The deal was never just about money, not entirely. Anthony spoke of legacy, of wanting someone who'd understand the weight of his empire. Zoe listened, her mind a maze. Of conflicting thoughts. "It's a partnership," he insisted, pouring 2 fingers of whiskey into a tumbler. "Mutually beneficial." But the nights when he'd wake, gasping, haunted by nightmares of a past he refused to name, told a different tale. One morning, Zoe found a half-empty bottle of sleeping pills by his bedside and a note that said, "Forgive me." The handwriting was shaky. She never mentioned it. Instead, she poured the pills down the sink, wondering how many times she'd have to save a man who didn't want to be saved. Zoe's friends called her crazy when she told them about the proposal. "You're trading your youth for his cash?" Her best friend Lisa had shrieked over coffee. "It's trapped by truth before you even say I do." Zoe had laughed, but the words stung. "It's not like that," she'd lied. But in the dead of night, as Anthony snored softly beside her, she'd trace the lines on his face and wonder, what if it is? The doubt was a parasite, gnawing at her certainty. Yet every time she thought of walking away, she'd remember the look in his eyes when he'd said, "You'll be taken care of," and the fear that gripped her stomach. Richer than she ever imagined, but not in money, turned out to be a prison with silk walls and a gilded lock. Anthony's health, according to his physicians, was perfect for his age. But he insisted to Zoe, over brandy one evening, that he was dying. "Months, maybe a year," he said, his tone casual as if discussing the weather. Zoe's heart had leapt into her throat. "Why would you say that?" He shrugged. "Preparation. Isn't that what you want? A clear exit strategy?" She'd laughed then, a sharp, brittle sound. "You're not exactly giving me much to work with." "Here." Anthony's gaze turned distant. Maybe she thought he'd die soon. Then everything changed isn't just your story. Maybe it's mine too. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Zoe didn't know whether to be scared or intrigued. As weeks turned into months, Zoe found herself studying Anthony in moments she didn't guard, when he thought she wasn't looking. The way his shoulders slumped when he read certain letters. How he'd linger in front of a painting of a woman, in a blue dress, his touch almost tender. The staff called her the ghost, and Zoe's curiosity burned hotter with each whisper. One afternoon, while rummaging through the attic, a place Anthony had explicitly forbidden, she found a box labeled, "Eleanor, do not open." Inside were yellowed letters, a locket with a photo of a young woman who looked eerily like Zoe, and a newspaper clipping about a scandal that had shaken the Gupta Empire decades ago. What the will didn't say about the past was that it had claws, and they were raking through Zoe's present. Zoe learned to smile through the static of whispers. At charity galas, where champagne flutes clinked like judgy metronomes, she'd hear fragments. "Did you see her ring? Must have cost a kidney." Or, "She's young enough to be his granddaughter." Her response? A practiced tilt of the head, a laugh that said, "Your opinion is a dial tone, boring and irrelevant." But the real storm brewed online. Her Instagram flooded with comments like "Gold Digger Alert" and He's just a meal ticket with a pulse. Lisa, her pragmatic best friend, called one night, voice sharp. Zoe, you're letting them rent space in your head. Zoe slammed the laptop shut. I don't care, she lied, the words bitter as cold coffee. She thought it was just a deal, she reminded herself. But deals didn't haunt your dreams. The staff at the mansion didn't help. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, would hum mournful tunes while dusting Zoe's designer shoes, her eyes pitying. The gardener muttered about karma while trimming hedges into frowny faces. Even the doorman gave her that look, the one that said, "You'll wake up one day and wonder what you've become." Zoe retaliated with small victories, leaving $100 tips, memorizing everyone's birthdays, baking carrot cakes that made the chef cry, in a good way. They'll warm to you eventually, Anthony said one evening, not looking up from his paperwork. Zoe snorted. Why? Because I'm suddenly relatable now that I've got your credit card? He didn't answer, but the ghost of a smile hovered on his lips. At a dinner party, a socialite named Vivian cornered her in the powder room. Darling, she purred, spraying perfume that stung Zoe's eyes. We all know why you're here. Zoe stared at her reflection, highlighter two-faced, lashes dramatic, and a ring that screamed, I'm compensating for something. Is it so wrong to want comfort? She shot back. Vivian's laugh was a scalpel. Comfort's a nice word for selling your soul. Zoe left the party early, hailing a taxi in the rain. Inside, she texted Lisa. Send me your address. I'm crashing. And bring wine. That night, they binge-watched rom-coms and dissected Anthony's motives. Maybe he's trapped by truth too, Lisa joked. Zoe threw a pillow. Not helping. Her mother called once, voice crackling over bad reception. Zoe, I heard rumors? Zoe cut her off. Mom, it's fine, I'm fine. But the unspoken question hung there. Are you proud? She imagined her mother's face, half disappointed, half resigned. After hanging up, Zoe stared at the diamond bracelet Anthony had gifted her. It glittered like a lie. What the will didn't say about marriage was that it turned your skin into a second-hand store. Every compliment a thrifted sweater, every luxury a borrowed ring. She wondered if Eleanor, Anthony's late wife, had felt the same. Probably. Ghosts, after all, leave receipts. One afternoon, a journalist named Marcus slid in, claiming to be just doing a profile on Mr. Gupta's philanthropy. Over coffee. That tasted like burnt ambition, he asked. How does it feel to be the subject of a modern fairy tale? Cinderella 2.0. Zoe's fork paused midair. Fairy tales have happily ever afters, she said slowly. This is a business merger with better PR. Marcus's smirk said he didn't believe her. Later, as he left, he tossed her a USB drive. Back up, he winked. Inside were photos of Anthony with a younger woman, not his wife, at a Monte Carlo casino in 1998. The resemblance to Zoe was uncanny. Her hands shook. The secret she wasn't ready for had just slipped into her inbox, wearing heels and a dangerous grin. Zoe's breaking point came at a Broadway show. Anthony had fallen asleep halfway through, snoring softly to The Phantom of the opera. The irony wasn't lost on her, and she slipped out. In the lobby, she bumped into a college friend, Jake. Zoe? Is that you? His eyes widened. Oh my God, are you married to him? She laughed too loud. It's complicated. But Jake didn't buy it. You look trapped. The word hung there, a truth she'd been avoiding. That night, she paced the mansion's marble floors until dawn, the diamond ring a weight on her finger. A golden cage with dark walls wasn't just a metaphor anymore. It was the clink of crystal, the hum of a generator powering spotlights that never dimmed, and somewhere in the dark, Anthony's nightmares echoed like a metronome counting, down to a revelation she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. Zoe's new life was an Instagram-worthy fantasy. Anthony's credit card unlocked doors to Bergdorf Goodman, where sales associates curtsied like courtiers and handed her cashmere scarves that cost more than her first car. She had a walk-in closet that smelled of sandalwood and possibility, shelves sagging under the weight of Manolos and Jimmy Choos. Yet some nights, as she curled into the king-sized bed that smelled of Anthony's sandalwood cologne and isolation, she'd trace the diamond ring on her finger and wonder, is this all there is? The emptiness inside her felt like a black hole, swallowing champagne toasts and silk sheets whole. Love, lies, and luxury. The triad was missing a key player, and the absence throbbed like a toothache. The mansion itself seemed to hold its breath. Marble floors echoed with unspoken words, chandeliers casting shadows that trembled like secrets. Zoe would wander its halls at night, the silence pressing against her ears, and find Anthony in his study, hunched over ledgers that told stories of boardroom wars and forgotten deals. "You're like a ghost," she teased once, leaning against the doorway. He looked up, eyes sharp. "Ghosts don't pay the bills, Zoe." The retort stung, but she laughed it off. She thought it was just a deal, she reminded herself. Deals didn't bleed. The staff's nervous energy was contagious. The cook would burn soufflés when Zoe entered the kitchen, the gardener uproot flowers if she lingered too long in the rose garden. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper, had taken to leaving subtle gifts. A D.I.'s jasmine plant for serenity, a book titled The Art of Letting Go, as if she were a therapist dispensing homework. Zoe would smile, accept the offerings, then Google Mrs. Chen's background. Divorced, 2 kids, pays $1,200 rent a month. Empathy curdled into guilt, then hardened into resolve. They don't get to judge, she'd think, swiping her Amex Platinum at another pop-up shop. But the judgment, like static, clung. One afternoon, while trying on a Givenchy gown that made her look like a human wishbone, Zoe overheard 2 staff members whispering in the hallway. "She's just like her," one hissed. Same smile, same eyes. The other shushed her urgently. "Mrs. Gupta's coming." Zoe stepped out, her heart drumming. "Like who?" she asked lightly, adjusting the dress's strap. The maids exchanged glances, then stammered about, "No one, Mrs. Gupta, just a guest from years ago." But the seed was planted. The hidden life of a tycoon wasn't just about Anthony's business deals. It was about the women who'd haunted his halls before her. Zoe's therapist, Dr. Linda, paid for by Anthony, of course, called it survivor's guilt. "You're thriving while others struggle," she said, her voice all empathy and expensive perfume. "But I earned this," Zoe snapped, though the words tasted sour. Dr. Linda raised an eyebrow. "Did you? Or did you trade one kind of poverty for another?" That night, Zoe dreamt of her college days, ramen dinners, all-night study sessions, a boyfriend who'd called her ambitious before dumping her for someone less intense. She woke up clutching a pillow, the scent of Anthony's cologne, a stranger against her skin. The strange tension in the mansion peaked during dinner parties. Anthony would introduce her as "my wife," with a formality that made her name sound like a stranger's. Guests would coo over her jewels, their eyes darting to Anthony's graying temples. "So, how did you two meet?" they'd ask, leaning in, like vultures. Zoe had perfected her elevator pitch. It was practical. But the questions lingered, like a bad aftertaste. One night, a drunken guest slurred, "So you're just a sugar baby with a wedding ring?" The room froze. Zoe smiled, her voice honeyed. "Call me that again, and I'll show you the prenup." The silence was a trophy, but the victory felt hollow. The third-floor study was the mansion's forbidden fruit. Its oak door, polished to a mirror sheen, stood at the end of a hallway that smelled of beeswax and secrets. Anthony had mentioned it once, casually, as they toured the house on her first day. "This room's off limits. My sanctuary." The key dangled from a hook in the kitchen like a taunt, its bronze surface gleaming under fluorescence. Zoe's curiosity was a slow-burn fire, igniting every time she passed it. One night, after a particularly nasty argument where Anthony had snapped, "You don't get to question my privacy," she'd found herself tracing the key's edge. The billionaire's secret, she mused, probably involved mistresses, embezzled funds, or a taxidermy collection. Her money was on mistresses. The staff's behavior around the room was a masterclass in suspicious nonchalance. Mrs. Chen would accidentally leave the hallway light on, as if willing Zoe to peek. The gardener, while trimming hedges into the shape of question marks, had muttered, "Some doors stay locked for a reason, Mrs. Gupta." Zoe had laughed it off. Superstitious nonsense. But the seed was planted. One afternoon, armed with a glass of wine, courage in liquid form, she'd slipped the key into the lock. It bit into the wood with a satisfying click. The door creaked open, revealing a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean. Inside, a single desk held a laptop, a phone, and a framed photo of Anthony with a woman who looked astonishingly like Zoe. Her heart stopped. From sugar baby to something else? The woman in the photo was smiling, her hand intertwined with Anthony's. Zoe's wine glass shattered on the floor. The room was a ghost. Dust motes danced in sunbeams that slanted through the windows, illuminating shelves lined with books. Zoe had never seen Anthony read poetry, philosophy, novels by authors who died young. A playlist titled Eleanor's Favorites was queued on the laptop. Nina Simone, Leonard Cohen, a band called The Velvet Underground. Zoe's fingers hovered over the touchpad. What the will didn't say about Anthony's past was that he'd been a music producer before his father's empire swallowed him whole. The photo on the desk, a younger Anthony with the doppelganger woman, had a caption on the back. "Lena and I, St. Tropez, 92. Zoe's blood turned to ice. Lena, the name from his nightmares, the name he'd whispered when he thought she wasn't listening. Zoe spent hours in that room pretending to be an investigator in a noir film. She found letters in the desk drawer, typed no signatures, demanding silence about the accident. A passport with a visa stamp from Switzerland in 1993. A newspaper clipping about a fire at a brownstone in Greenwich Village that killed 3 people. She thought he'd die soon. Then everything changed. The fire was the night Anthony's first wife died, the article said. But the passport suggested he'd fled the country shortly after. Zoe's mind raced. Trapped by truth wasn't just a slogan. It was a cage with a combination lock she was determined to crack. When Anthony returned home that evening, he found her in the room. His face went white. "Zoe," he breathed, "you shouldn't be in here." She held up the photo. "Who is she?" He froze. "No one." The lie was a threadbare sweater. Zoe stepped closer. "Tell me." His eyes darted to the door, as if expecting rescue. Instead, he collapsed into the desk chair, head in hands. "It's complicated." Zoe's laugh was a whip. "My entire life's been complicated since I said yes to you." He looked up, tears glinting. "I wanted to protect you." Protect her? From what? The truth, Zoe realized, had fangs. That night, Zoe dreamed of fires and oceans. She woke up screaming, her pillow damp. Anthony was at the doorway, pajamas disheveled. "Nightmares," he said softly. "We all have them." Zoe sat up, her heart a drum. "Tell me about Lena." He hesitated, then sat beside her. "She was my second chance," he whispered. Zoe's blood ran cold. Second chance, the words from the photo echoed in her mind. Anthony's voice trembled. "I loved her. Then I lost her. And now..." He trailed off, but Zoe didn't need him to finish. The truth was a knife in her gut. The secret she wasn't ready for had just unsheathed itself. Anthony's sleep was a battlefield. Some nights, he'd stir restless, muttering incoherently, while others found him trembling, drenched in sweat, his voice pleading with ghosts. "Lena," he'd whisper, the name a dagger in the silence. Zoe would hover at the edge of the bed, her heart a metronome of confusion and unease. "Who are you?" she'd think, tracing the lines on his face, the ones that told stories of battles fought and lost. Once, she'd mustered the courage to ask, "Who's Lena?" Anthony's response had been a wall of ice. "No one." But his eyes had screamed everything. That night, Zoe had dreamt of a woman who looked like her, standing at the edge of a cliff, the wind stealing her screams. The staff's whispers grew louder, their glances more frenzied. The gardener, while trimming rose bushes into spirals of unease, had muttered, "Master's been having bad dreams since you arrived, Mrs. Gupta." Zoe had laughed it off. Superstitions. But the words had rooted themselves in her mind like weeds. One morning she found a vial of sleeping pills in the bathroom cabinet, the label peeling like a forgotten promise. Anthony's handwriting was scrawled on a nearby note. "Don't need these anymore." Her stomach had dropped. What the will didn't say about his perfect health was that it was a castle built on sand. Zoe's curiosity, once a gentle nudge, became a tidal wave. She'd begun leaving the bedroom door ajar at night, pretending to sleep as she listened to Anthony's restless snores. One evening, after a particularly bad episode where he'd nearly fallen out of bed, she'd found him in the kitchen, raiding the freezer for ice cream. "Can't sleep?" she'd asked, voice laced with forced nonchalance. Anthony had jumped, then forced a smile. "Old habits," he'd said, scooping vanilla into a bowl. Zoe had slid into a chair opposite him. "Tell me about her." The spoon clattered to the floor. "About who?" He knew exactly. The air thickened with unspoken truths. Zoe's phone buzzed, a notification from her bank, reminding her of her growing balance. Love, lies, and luxury, she thought bitterly. The luxuries were getting pricier by the day. The nightmares escalated. One night, Anthony woke screaming, the sound guttural and raw. Zoe bolted upright, her heart hammering. He was thrashing, his hands clawing at the air as if fighting an invisible enemy. "No, please!" he begged, his voice cracking. Zoe reached out, her hand hovering over his shoulder. "Anthony, wake up." He jolted awake, gasping, his eyes wild. "I'm here," she soothed, though she felt anything but safe. He wiped his face, his breath ragged. "Bad dream," he mumbled. Zoe bit her lip. "Bad enough to make you cry?" He froze. She hadn't meant to say it aloud. The silence stretched until it ached. "I'm sorry," he whispered. But his apology wasn't for the tears. It was for the truth he wouldn't utter. Zoe's research became an obsession. Late nights were spent scouring the internet for clues about Lena. Social media, old newspapers, even genealogy sites. Nothing yielded results. It was as if the woman had never existed. Until, one rainy afternoon, she stumbled upon a grainy video from a 1992 fashion show in Paris. There, in the front row, sat a man with salt and pepper hair and a woman with Zoe's smile. The caption read, "Fashion mogul Anthony Gupta with his rumored girlfriend, Lena Voss." Zoe's blood ran cold. Lena Voss. The name was like a key turning in a lock. She dug deeper, finding articles about a scandal that had shaken the Gupta empire decades ago. A fire at a brownstone, a missing person, whispers of cover-ups. The secret she wasn't ready for was clawing its way to the surface, hungry and vengeful. When Anthony returned home that evening, Zoe was waiting in the study. The video paused on the screen. His face drained of color. "You found her," he stated, not asked. Zoe nodded, her voice steady despite the tempest inside her. "Who was she to you?" He hesitated, then let out a humorless laugh. "My greatest mistake." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Zoe crossed her arms. "And what does that make me?" Anthony's gaze met hers, a storm of emotions swirling in his eyes. "You," he said slowly, "are my second chance." The admission hung between them, heavy with implications. She thought it was just a deal, but the fine print was bleeding through the contract. Zoe's hands trembled as she paged through the vintage leather album, its pages brittle with age. She'd found it tucked behind a loose brick in the mansion's wine cellar, a spot even the staff seemed to avoid. The photos inside were a time capsule. Anthony in his youth, charismatic and unhinged, arm in arm with a woman whose smile mirrored Zoe's own. Eleanor, the album labeled her, but Zoe knew that name belonged to Anthony's late wife, a woman who died in a car accident decades ago. These photos told a different story. Eleanor was elegant, timeless, but the resemblance to Zoe was staggering, a genetic echo that made her stomach churn. One photo in particular haunted her. Eleanor and Anthony at a masquerade ball, their masks abandoned on a nearby table. Eleanor's green eyes, framed by the same dimples Zoe had inherited from a mother she barely remembered, locked onto Anthony's with an intensity that suggested a story untold. The hidden life of a tycoon wasn't just about money. It was about love. Letters Zoe found tucked between the photos confirmed it. "My dearest Eleanor," they began, signed with a flourish that screamed Anthony. But why had Eleanor's face been photoshopped into recent events? A clip from last year's Met Gala showed Anthony with a woman who bore an uncanny resemblance to Eleanor and to Zoe. The implications were a poisoned dart to the heart. Zoe's mind raced. She texted Lisa, her fingers flying. "Meet me at the cafe, now." Over lattes that tasted like anxiety, Zoe spread the photos across the table. Lisa's gasp was audible. "It's like looking at your doppelganger." Zoe's laugh was humorless. "Or my mom." The word hung in the air. Lisa's eyes widened. "Oh my God, your mom's name. It's Lena, isn't it?" Zoe's blood turned to ice. How had Lisa known? "Her name was Lena Voss," Zoe whispered. Lisa's breath hitched. Lena Voss, the same name from the scandal back in the 90s? The one who disappeared? Zoe's phone buzzed. A Google alert for Lena Voss Gupta. The headline read, "Daughter of Lena Voss makes millions in tech startup, but where's her billionaire father?" Zoe's vision blurred. The secret she wasn't ready for was now screaming in her face. Back at the mansion, Zoe confronted Anthony in the study. The photos fanned out like a deck of accusation. "Explain," she demanded, her voice steady despite the hurricane in her chest. Anthony's face drained of color. "Zoe, it's not what you think." She laughed bitterly. "Really? Because it looks like my mom was your wife number 2, and she's been dead for decades." Anthony's eyes darted to the fireplace, where a portrait of Eleanor hung like a silent witness. "Your mother," he began, but Zoe cut him off. "Don't. The billionaire's secret reeks of dead women and stolen identities." The words hit him like a slap. He flinched. The truth, unraveled in fragments. Anthony admitted to an affair with Lena, Zoe's mother, in the early 90s, a relationship that produced Zoe, born 6 months after Lena disappeared. But Lena hadn't vanished. She'd faked her death to escape Anthony's controlling grip. She thought it was just a deal, but the fine print had been written in blood. Eleanor, Anthony's first wife, had known the truth, but agreed to keep it buried in exchange for a luxurious existence. Zoe was the ghost in the machine, the spitting image of the women Anthony had loved and lost. Truth buried under wealth was a tomb that now spat out bones. That night, as Zoe lay awake, the mansion felt like a living entity, a beast with too many mouths and no soul. The staff's whispered conversations, the locked room's secrets, Anthony's haunted nights, all of it converged into a single narrative. She wasn't just a wife. She was a walking eulogy for the lives Anthony had ruined. From sugar baby to something else, the something else was a daughter seeking answers in the shadows of her father's empire. The photo album had become her compass, leading her to truth she'd never asked for, but could no longer ignore. The staff's behavior had always been odd, but now it was a full-blown symphony of suspicion. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, would freeze mid-sweep whenever Zoe entered a room, her eyes darting like trapped mice. The gardener, Mr. Wong, had taken to muttering about bad karma while trimming hedges into the shapes of question marks. Even the usually chipper chef, Marco, was leaving Zoe's meals with slightly burnt edges, a silent protest, perhaps, against the unspoken tension. "They're just nervous around new management," Anthony had said with a dismissive wave. But Zoe knew better. The staff's whispers were a language unto themselves, and she was becoming fluent. One evening, while eavesdropping, accidentally, of course, outside the staff dining room, Zoe caught fragments of conversation. Said she saw Mrs. Gupta's ghost in the garden. The new Mrs. Gupta's the spitting image of Lena. Boss knows more than he's saying. The words collided in Zoe's mind like a chaotic puzzle. The old man's double life wasn't just a rumor, it was etched into the staff's fearful glances and abrupt silences. When Marco nearly dropped a tray of canapes after Zoe asked about the previous Mrs. Gupta, she realized the truth was a contagion spreading through the mansion's walls. The housekeeper's nervousness peaked during the full moon. Mrs. Chen would light incense in every corner, muttering prayers in a language Zoe didn't recognize. When Zoe questioned her, Mrs. Chen's response was a carefully rehearsed script. "Old traditions, Mrs. Gupta, nothing to worry about." But the incense, a heady mix of sandalwood and something sharper, like fear, lingered in the air like a warning. Zoe later discovered online that the scent was commonly used in rituals to ward off spirits. Truth buried under wealth wasn't just a metaphor anymore. It was the reason Mrs. Chen kept a small Buddha statue tucked beneath her apron. The gardener's contradictions were the most entertaining. One day he'd praise the mansion's rose garden as the finest in the state. The next he'd claim the soil was cursed and refused to plant new bulbs. When Zoe pressed him, he'd snap, "Soil don't lie, Mrs. Gupta. This land's seen too much." His hands, rough from decades of labor, trembled as he spoke. Zoe's curiosity turned into a game. How many layers of denial could she peel back before hitting truth? The answer, she discovered, was not many. One afternoon, after finding Mr. Wong burning what looked like letters in the garden, she confronted him. "Those were just old recipes," he lied, his face flushing guiltily. She thought he'd die soon. Then everything changed. The staff's fear suggested change might be deadly. The chef's nervousness manifested in his cooking. Meals that once arrived with precise plating now resembled abstract art. Sauce smeared like war paint, vegetables chopped haphazardly. When Zoe complimented his creative approach, Marco nearly dropped a wine glass. "Grazie, Mrs. Gupta," he'd stammer, his Italian accent thickening. Later, Zoe found a recipe book in the kitchen titled Funeral Feasts of Northern Italy. Its pages dog-eared and stained with what might have been tears, from sugar baby to something else. Marco's dishes were eulogies for a past he wouldn't name. When she asked about a particularly elaborate dessert, he'd mumbled something about honoring the departed and fled to the pantry, leaving Zoe to wonder who exactly was being mourned. The final clue came during a late-night stroll through the mansion's gardens. Zoe overheard Mr. Wong and Mrs. Chen arguing in hushed tones. "You shouldn't have told her about the fire," Wong hissed. "She needed to know," Chen retorted. "The new Mrs. Gupta's got the same fire in her eyes as Lena did." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Zoe stepped forward, her heart pounding. "What fire?" she asked calmly. The staff froze. Mrs. Chen's face contorted into a mask of pity. "The one that burned down the truth," she whispered before fleeing into the darkness. Wong remained, his eyes downcast. "It's time you knew, Mrs. Gupta," he said quietly. The secret she wasn't ready for was now standing at her doorstep, wearing garden gloves and regret. Zoe's investigation began with late-night Google searches and ended with a full-blown obsession. She'd start by Googling Lena Voss Gupta, her mother's name, only to find vague references to a model who'd retired suddenly in the early 90s. Then she'd pivot to Anthony's business dealings, unearthing articles about a fire at a brownstone in Greenwich Village that killed 3 people, a tragedy Anthony had called a terrible accident in interviews. But why had the staff mentioned a fire that burned down the truth? Zoe's curiosity morphed into a compulsion, her apartment filled with printouts and half-empty coffee mugs. The staff's nervousness fueled her quest. Mrs. Chen's incense burning sessions, Mr. Wong's cryptic comments about bad karma, and Marco's burnt meals. All of it felt like breadcrumbs, leading to a feast of secrets. Zoe's mind raced. The billionaire's secret wasn't just about a woman. It was about a cover-up. One night, she found a forgotten box in the mansion's attic labeled Eleanor's Things. Inside was a locket containing a photo of Anthony and Lena, their smiles frozen in time. Zoe's heart pounded. From sugar baby to something else. She wasn't just uncovering the past, she was rewriting her present. Zoe's methods grew bolder. She'd follow staff members on their breaks, pretending to enjoy the fresh air while eavesdropping on their conversations. Said she found the old photos, someone would whisper. Boss is getting nervous. The fragments ignited her determination. She even hacked into Anthony's email, a skill she'd picked up in college, and found encrypted files with names like Project Phoenix and Lena's Trust. She thought he'd die soon. Then everything changed. The files hinted at a legacy that was very much alive. The breakthrough came during a charity gala. Zoe spotted an older woman staring at her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "You look just like her," the woman hissed, before vanishing into the crowd. Zoe chased her into the night, only to lose her in the taxi-filled streets. Back at the mansion, she texted Lisa, "Need backup, now." Over emergency pizza, they brainstormed. Lisa suggested checking public records for Lena Voss. Zoe found a birth certificate. Zoe Novak, born Lena Voss's daughter 6 months after her disappearance. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. The secret she wasn't ready for was her own reflection. Zoe confronted Anthony in his study, the birth certificate clutched in her hand. He paled, his composure fracturing. "You were supposed to never find out," he murmured. Zoe's voice shook but held steady. "Find out what? That my mother faked her death to escape you? That you've been living a lie for decades?" Anthony's gaze dropped to his desk, where a framed photo of Eleanor sat like a shrine. "It's more complicated," he said weakly. Zoe laughed, sharp and humorless. "Complicated? Or just trapped by truth?" The silence between them was a canyon, and Zoe was teetering on the edge. That night, as Zoe lay in bed, the mansion felt like a cage with its door ajar. The staff's whispers, the locked room's secrets, Anthony's haunted nights, all of it converged into a single truth. She wasn't just a wife. She was a living reminder of the woman Anthony had lost and the life he'd buried. Love, lies, and luxury. The luxury was a mirage, and the lies were the foundation of her existence. The truth was a grenade she'd just pulled the pin on, and the explosion was imminent. Zoe's world tilted when Anthony confessed he was dying. It happened during a thunderstorm, the mansion's windows shaking as if the sky itself were angry. They were in the study, the air thick with the scent of rain and Anthony's sandalwood cologne. "I don't have much time left," he'd said, his voice steady, but for the faintest tremor. Zoe had laughed it off. "The doctor said you're fine." But his gaze held hers, unflinching. "Doctors lie," he'd replied. "I know my body." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and Zoe's mind raced. She thought, he'd die soon. Then everything changed. The then was now, and she was unprepared for the weight of it. The staff's behavior shifted overnight. Mrs. Chen began burning more incense, the tendrils of smoke curling like prayers towards the ceiling. Mr. Wong muttered about unfinished business while tending to the rose garden, his gloves stained with earth and something darker Zoe couldn't name. Even Marco's cooking took on a funereal tone, meals served cold, flavors muted, as if mourning a loss yet to come. Zoe confronted Anthony about the staff's strangeness. "They sense the inevitable," he said, his eyes distant, "like animals before a storm." But Zoe wasn't an animal. She was a woman with questions, and the answers were slipping through her fingers like sand. Zoe's research revealed a pattern. Anthony's illness coincided with her arrival at the mansion. Before she'd said "I do," he'd been full of energy, attending galas, closing deals with the charm of a man half his age. Now he moved like a ghost, his once sharp wit dulled by fatigue. Doctors' reports confirmed he was healthy, perfect for his age, as one put it. But Anthony's insistence that he was dying felt like a performance, a carefully orchestrated charade. The secret she wasn't ready for was etched into the lines of his face, a story he refused to finish. One night, unable to sleep, Zoe rummaged through Anthony's study. She found a medical file labeled "Confidential" in his desk drawer. Heart racing, she opened it, only to find it filled with articles about a rare genetic disorder. Symptoms include fatigue, memory loss, and night terrors, she read aloud, her blood turning to ice. Anthony's nightmares, the names he whispered in his sleep. The ghost of Lena. Zoe's hands shook. Truth buried under wealth wasn't just a metaphor, it was a diagnosis with her name on it. She'd uncovered the illness, but the cure was buried deeper than she'd bargained for. Zoe confronted Anthony the next morning, the file clutched to her chest like a shield. "You're not dying," she accused. He looked up from his coffee, surprise flickering across his features. "What makes you say that?" She slammed the file on the table. "This. You've been researching this disorder for years, since before we met." Anthony's composure wavered. "Zoe, Save it," she cut in. "Why the act? Why make me think you're dying?" His silence was deafening. Finally, he sighed. "Because the truth is harder to swallow. The billionaire's secret was a pill she was about to take, whether she liked it or not." That evening, as rain lashed against the windows, Zoe sat in the study, the file open on her lap. Anthony entered, his presence a storm in the room. "You deserve to know," he said quietly. Zoe looked up, her heart a drum. "Know what?" He stepped closer, his eyes holding hers. "That your mother had the same disorder." The words hit her like a physical blow. From sugar baby to something else, she wasn't just a wife. She was a reminder of the daughter Anthony had lost and the legacy he'd tried to outrun. The truth was a beast he'd kept on a leash, and now it was roaring for release. Zoe discovered the letter tucked between the pages of a book in Anthony's study, a book she'd never seen him read. It was sealed with a wax drip, the envelope addressed simply to "My Second Chance." Her hands trembled as she slid it open, the parchment inside yellowed with age. The handwriting was unmistakably Anthony's, though more youthful, more desperate. "My dearest Zoe," it began, and her breath hitched. The letter detailed a life she'd never known, a love affair with Lena, her mother, and the child that resulted, her. "I've watched you from afar," it confessed, praying for a chance to make amends. Zoe's vision blurred. The billionaire's secret was inked in black and white, bleeding through the paper. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Anthony had known her identity all along, the reason for his late-night stares, the way he'd flinch when she laughed, a sound so like Lena's. She thought it was just a deal, but the fine print had been this letter, this confession of a love that had never died. Zoe's mind raced. The staff's whispers, the locked room, the photos, all of it made grotesque sense now. She was the ghost in the machine, the daughter of the woman Anthony had ruined and then mourned. Zoe confronted Anthony at dawn, The letter crumpled in her fist. "You knew!" she accused, her voice breaking. Anthony stood by the window, the rising sun casting long shadows across his face. "I've always known," he admitted quietly. Zoe's laugh was a broken thing. "Why didn't you tell me?" He turned, his eyes glistening. "Because I was afraid you'd leave." The honesty hung between them like a challenge. Zoe's heart ached, a strange, foreign sensation. "You used me," she whispered. Anthony's gaze dropped. "I used you to hold on to the past, to hold on to her." The admission was a blade, sharp and double-edged. The staff found them hours later, Zoe and Anthony sitting in the garden, the letter fluttering forgotten on the grass. Mrs. Chen brought tea, her eyes sympathetic. "I told him to confess years ago," she murmured. Zoe looked up, tears drying on her cheeks. "Why didn't you?" Mrs. Chen smiled sadly. "Some secrets are prisons, others are keys." Zoe took the offered cup, the porcelain warm against her trembling hands. The secret: she wasn't ready. For it had become a burden she'd have to carry, but it was also a revelation, a truth that shattered her identity and rebuilt it in the same instant. Zoe's world narrowed to the four walls of the study as she pieced together the past. Anthony provided fragments: Lena's disappearance, Eleanor's complicity, the decades of living with a lie. "I wanted to protect you," he said, his voice weary. Zoe's response was bitter. "By lying to me? By making me your wife?" He flinched. "By giving you a chance to know the truth when I'm gone." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Zoe realized then that love, lies, and luxury wasn't just their story. It was the epitaph of two lives lived in shadows. That night, as rain tapped against the windows, Zoe lay awake, the letter pressed to her chest. Anthony's confession had ignited a fire within her, a determination to uncover the truth in its entirety, from sugar baby to something else. She'd traded one kind of poverty for another, only to find that the real currency was knowledge. The staff's whispers, once a source of irritation, now felt like a chorus of untold stories waiting to be heard. Zoe knew her journey was far from over. The truth had been buried under wealth for too long, and she was the one who'd unearth it, whatever the cost. The confrontation happened at dawn, the mansion's halls still cloaked in shadows. Anthony stood by the window, the early light outlining his silhouette like a confession. Zoe faced him, the letter from Lena clutched in her trembling hand. "You knew my mother," she stated, her voice a blade. Anthony's sigh was a surrender. "I loved her," he admitted quietly. "And you," he added, his gaze locking with hers, "you remind me of her in ways that haunt me." Zoe's heart thudded, a dangerous rhythm. The billionaire's secret wasn't just a past affair, it was a present wound oozing truths. Anthony's story spilled out in fragments. He and Lena had been lovers in the early 90s, an illicit romance fueled by passion and naivety. Zoe was the product of that love, a fact Anthony had discovered shortly after her birth. But Lena, fearing Anthony's controlling nature, had faked her death and disappeared with their daughter. Anthony's life had been a tapestry of regrets since then. She thought it was just a deal, but the deal had been woven into a web of identity and loss. Zoe's mind reeled. The staff's whispers, the photos, the locked room. It all converged into a narrative that made her question everything. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, her voice cracking. Anthony's eyes held hers, a silent plea. "Because I was selfish. I wanted to protect you from the truth, from me." The admission hung in the air like a challenge. Zoe's anger warred with a strange, disorienting pity. "You used me," she whispered. Anthony's gaze dropped. "I used you to hold on to the past, to hold on to her." The words were a blade, sharp and double-edged. The staff found them hours later. Zoe and Anthony sitting in the garden, the letter fluttering forgotten on the grass. Mrs. Chen brought tea, her eyes sympathetic. "I told him to confess years ago," she murmured. Zoe looked up, tears drying on her cheeks. "Why didn't you?" Mrs. Chen smiled sadly. "Some secrets are prisons, others are keys." Zoe took the offered cup, the porcelain warm against her trembling hands. The secret. She wasn't ready for, had become a burden she'd have to carry. But it was also a revelation, a truth that shattered her identity and rebuilt it in the same instant. Zoe's world narrowed to the four walls of the study as she pieced together the past. Anthony provided fragments, Lena's disappearance, Eleanor's complicity, the decades of living with a lie. "I wanted to protect you," he said, his voice weary. Zoe's response was bitter. "By lying to me? By making me your wife?" He flinched. "By giving you a chance to know the truth when I'm gone." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Zoe realized then that love, lies, and luxury wasn't just their story. It was the epitaph of two lives lived in shadows. That night, as rain tapped against the windows, Zoe lay awake, the letter pressed to her chest. Anthony's confession had ignited a fire within her, a determination to uncover the truth in its entirety. From sugar baby to something else, she'd traded one kind of poverty for another, only to find that the real currency was knowledge. The staff's whispers, once a source of irritation, now felt like a chorus of untold stories waiting to be heard. Zoe knew her journey was far from over. The truth had been buried under wealth for too long, and she was the one who'd unearth it, whatever the cost. Zoe's world fractured when Anthony revealed the truth about her mother. Lena had faked her death to escape Anthony's suffocating control, but not before leaving a trail of breadcrumbs, a trust fund, a letter, a network of people who'd protected Zoe her entire life. "Your mother loved you fiercely," Anthony said, his voice cracking. Zoe stared at him, her mind reeling. She'd grown up believing her mother had abandoned her out of selfishness, not out of fear. The hidden life of a tycoon wasn't just about Anthony's past. It was about Zoe's present, rewritten in the margins of lies. The staff's behavior shifted overnight. Mrs. Chen, ever the silent guardian, revealed herself as Lena's childhood friend. "She wanted you to have a normal life," she explained, her eyes glistening. Marco, the chef, disclosed that he'd been Lena's personal assistant, tasked with watching over Zoe from afar. Even Mr. Wong, the gardener, admitted to being Lena's brother, his weathered face softening as he called Zoe niece for the first time. Zoe's loneliness, a constant companion since childhood, evaporated in the face of this newly discovered family. She thought it was just a deal, but the deal had been a safety net woven by a mother's love. Zoe's journey of self-discovery became an obsession. She traveled to Paris, following a clue in Lena's letter to a small apartment overlooking the Seine. There she found Lena's old atelier, its walls lined with sketches of a woman who resembled Zoe in every way. A neighbor, an elderly woman with a memory like a steel trap, revealed that Lena had visited Zoe secretly every year on her birthday, always from a distance. "She'd cry after," the neighbor said softly. Zoe's heart ached. From sugar baby to something else. She wasn't just a wife. She was the daughter of a woman who'd sacrificed everything for her freedom. Back in New York, Zoe confronted Anthony with new questions. "Why did you let me marry you knowing who I was?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and vulnerability. Anthony's sigh was heavy with regret. "I wanted to, Atone, to give you the life your mother couldn't." Zoe's laugh was sharp. "By trapping me in a gilded cage?" He flinched. "It was never supposed to be a cage. It was supposed to be a bridge, To your mother's legacy, to the truth. The words hung in the air like a challenge. The secret she wasn't ready for had roots that stretched across continents and decades, binding Zoe to a family she'd never known but had always felt. Zoe's identity unraveled and rewove itself in the glare of truth. She was no longer just Zoe Novak, the struggling artist who'd married an old billionaire for security. She was Lena Voss's daughter, the heir to a love story that had been buried under wealth and regret. Love, lies, and luxury. The luxury was now tainted, the lies exposed. But the love? That was a new frontier. Zoe's journey had just begun, and the path ahead was fraught with questions that demanded answers, answers that would redefine not just her past, but her future. Zoe's inheritance from Anthony was a paradox. The prenup guaranteed her $5 million, but the true gift lay in a folder he'd left on his desk, a collection of letters, patents, and blueprints that hinted at a life beyond wealth. There was a letter from Lena, Zoe's mother, postmarked just months before her disappearance. "My dearest Zozo," it began, "if you're reading this, I failed to protect you. But know this, your father loves you, in his own silent way." The words were a balm and a wound, all at once. Richer than she ever imagined, but not in money. Zoe realized the true inheritance was the legacy of resilience and love that had been passed down, not the numbers in a bank account. Anthony had also left Zoe access to his network, CEOs, artists, philanthropists, people who'd once seen him as a mentor. "Use these connections wisely," his final letter instructed. Zoe did. She reached out to a venture capitalist mentioned in Anthony's notes, pitching an idea she'd been nurturing since her days as a starving artist, an online platform for emerging artists to showcase and sell their work. To her surprise, the capitalist loved it. "You're not just selling art," he said during their meeting. "You're selling stories." She thought it was just a deal, but the deal had evolved into a mission, one that honored her mother's passion for art and Anthony's hidden support. The staff's final gift to Zoe was a small, ornate box presented by Mrs. Chen on the day Zoe left the mansion. Inside was a key. "To Eleanor's studio," Mrs. Chen explained. "She'd want you to have it." The studio, hidden above a gallery in downtown Manhattan, was a treasure trove of unsold art, a legacy of creativity stifled by circumstance. Zoe transformed it into a community space for artists, naming it the Second Chance Studio. The Bay name was a nod to Anthony's letter and a testament to her own journey. The billionaire's secret had been love, loss, and redemption, and now it was Zoe's turn to write the next chapter. Zoe's life took on a new rhythm. She split her time between managing the studio, developing her platform, and writing a memoir chronicling her journey from Anthony's wife to the daughter of a woman who'd fought for her freedom. The book, tentatively titled From Sugar Baby to Something Else, became an unexpected bestseller. Readers connected with her honesty, her vulnerability, and her refusal to be defined by the labels others had placed on her. Love, lies, and luxury, Zoe had taken the luxury and turned it into a tool for empowerment, transforming lies into truths that set her free. One evening, as Zoe hosted an art showcase at the studio, she received a letter from Lena's brother, Mr. Wong. "Your mother would be proud," it read. "She always believed in second chances." Zoe's eyes welled with tears. She'd never known her mother, but through Anthony's revelations and the staff's stories, she'd built a relationship with the woman who'd shaped her into who she was. The secret she wasn't ready for had become the foundation of a new identity, one built not on money, but on legacy, love, and the courage to uncover the truth. Zoe's journey from the opulent confines of Anthony's mansion to the bustling heart of Manhattan was a rebirth. The truth about her mother, Lena, and Anthony's dual life had shattered her former self, but from the debris, a new Zoe emerged, one armed with resilience and a purpose that transcended wealth. She began by severing ties with the life that had once seemed like a golden cage. The mansion, with its whispered secrets and locked rooms, became a distant memory as Zoe traded luxury for a modest apartment filled with natural light and the laughter of newfound friends. She thought it was just a deal, but the deal had evolved into a revolution, a reclamation of her identity from the shadows of lies. The process of rebuilding wasn't linear. There were days when the weight of discovery pressed heavily on Zoe's shoulders, when the resemblance to her mother felt less like a blessing and more like a curse. Yet it was during these moments of doubt that the staff's parting gifts proved most valuable. Mrs. Chen's letters from Lena offered comfort, her words a bridge across time. "You are loved, Zozo, even when you cannot see it." Marco's culinary wisdom found its way into Zoe's small kitchen, where she experimented with recipes that told stories of resilience and creativity. And Mr. Wong's gardening tips transformed her apartment's balcony into a sanctuary of herbs and flowers. A quiet nod to the brother she'd never known but whose love had always been present. Zoe's professional life flourished in unexpected ways. The online platform for artists, once a mere spark of an idea, ignited into a wildfire of success. Anthony's network, combined with Zoe's unwavering determination, opened doors that had previously been locked tight. She connected with galleries, secured partnerships with art supply companies, and even caught the attention of a documentary filmmaker interested in her unique journey. Richer than she ever imagined, but not in money. The wealth now came in the form of fulfillment, of seeing artists she'd helped gain recognition and financial stability. The platform's slogan, "Your art, your story," became a rallying cry for creators worldwide. Yet, the most profound transformation occurred within Zoe herself. She began to understand that her marriage to Anthony, though rooted in practicality, and later uncovered as a tapestry of hidden truths, had been a stepping stone. It had forced her to confront uncomfortable realities about herself and the world, to question the narratives she'd internalized about love, sacrifice, and identity. Love, lies, and luxury. She now saw that the luxury had been a backdrop, the lies a catalyst, and the love. That had been multifaceted, complex, and often disguised as something else. There was Anthony's flawed, guilt-driven love, Lena's sacrificial, distant love, and now Zoe's self-discovered love, a love for herself, for her mother's memory, and for the life she was actively creating. Zoe's world, once shattered by revelations, had been meticulously rebuilt on foundations of truth and self-awareness. The staff's whispers, Anthony's secrets, and Lena's sacrifices all had become threads in a new narrative, one where Zoe was the author. She'd learned that identity was not a fixed destination, but a continuous journey of uncovering and becoming. And as she stood in her sunlit apartment, surrounded by art and possibility, Zoe knew that the path ahead, though uncertain, was hers to walk, a path rich with the kind of wealth that no bank could measure and no truth could diminish. Zoe's exit from Anthony's world was nothing short of poetic. On the day she left the mansion, she wore the same thrift store dress she'd arrived in, its fabric now a little faded but still dignified. The staff lined the hallway, their eyes glistening with unshed tears. Mrs. Chen pressed a small package into Zoe's hand, a vintage necklace that had belonged to Lena. "For when you need to remember you're never alone," she whispered. Marco thrust a container of his Nana's biscotti into her bag. "For the journey," he said with a watery smile. Mr. Wong simply nodded, his eyes speaking volumes. She thought it was just a deal, but the deal had transformed into a tapestry of human connection that no amount of wealth could replicate. Zoe's new life was a testament to the truth's transformative power. She turned the online platform into a thriving business, connecting artists from corners of the world Anthony had never even heard of. Her memoir, From Sugar Baby to Something Else, became a cultural phenomenon, sparking conversations about identity, privilege, and the intricate dance between love and sacrifice. Readers connected with her authenticity, her refusal to vilify Anthony, or romanticize her mother. Love, lies, and luxury. Zoe had distilled the chaos into a narrative of growth, showing that the most valuable currency was self-awareness and the courage to evolve. One unexpected gift from Anthony's legacy was the network of allies he'd left behind. A venture capitalist he'd once mentored became Zoe's business partner, helping her expand the platform into a global marketplace. A renowned artist from Anthony's past donated a piece to Zoe's studio, its proceeds funding scholarships for underprivileged creators. Even Vivian, the socialite who'd once sneered at Zoe, reached out with an olive branch. "We all have our journeys," she said over champagne at a gallery opening. Zoe smiled. "Some of us just start later than others." Zoe's relationship with Anthony's memory evolved into something complex yet peaceful. She'd visit his grave occasionally, not out of obligation, but out of a strange sense of kinship. "You were a mess of contradictions," she'd murmur, placing a single rose on the stone. "But you gave me the push I needed." The truth about his dual life, the love for Lena that had haunted him, the guilt that had driven him to create. A new family with Elena humanized him in ways wealth never could. The billionaire's secret wasn't just about hidden identities. It was about the universal hunger for connection and redemption. Years later, as Zoe stood at the opening of her second studio in Paris, she reflected on the journey. The staff's whispers, Anthony's lies, the mansion's locked rooms, all of it had been steps on a path she'd had to walk to understand herself. The gold in the vault had never been the true treasure. It had been the truth all along, the messy, complicated, beautiful truth that had set her free. And as artists filled the space around her, their creations telling stories of their own struggles and triumphs, Zoe knew she'd found something far richer than money. A legacy built on authenticity, resilience, and the courage to keep becoming. Zoe's extraordinary journey from the gilded halls of Anthony's mansion to finding her authentic path shows us that true wealth comes from understanding our roots and embracing our truth. The shocking revelations about Anthony's past and Zoe's heritage challenge everything we thought we knew about love, sacrifice, and identity. But what resonated with you most? Was it the emotional weight of hidden family secrets, the transformation from dependency to empowerment, or the unexpected compassion that emerged from deceit? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us what you'd do differently in Zoe's shoes, or what lesson you're taking away from her story. If you were gripped by this tale of twists and self-discovery, do us a favor. Hit that like button, share the video with friends who love a good mystery, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. Turn on those notifications so you never miss another story that makes you question everything you thought you knew. Because in our next video, we'll be exploring more secrets that hide beneath surfaces of perfection, and you won't want to miss it.